Okay, I'm going to talk very briefly about exception handling in Java. Now, an exception is an error which occurs in your code, and usually these are foreseeable. So I'm just going to show you what you might do to stop your code breaking and showing errors on the screen whenever you have a problem. I'm going to do this in Eclipse. I have a simple little error here. I have a program which declares an array. The array is 4 elements long. The first element is 0, 1, 2, 3, the position number. So therefore, if I try and print out element number 5, that will give me an error. In fact, if I tried to print out element number 4, that would give me an error as well. Because this is element 0, element 1, element 2, element 3. I'm just going to run that. And you'll see straight away I have an exception down here. It says exception in thread main, so in my main program. And it's called a Java Lang array index out of bounds exception. So that's pretty self-explanatory, really. It means I'm trying to access something which is further than the outer limit of the array. Now, I'm going to show you how you might handle that. So if I'm going to try something like that, or do a piece of code like that, I'm going to enclose it inside a try block. A try block means that you're doing something and it may not work. I'm just going to put it in there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to catch the exception. So I'm going to say catch exception E. I'm going to give it a name. And inside this block which appears, I'm going to do something with that. So I'm going to say system.out.println. There has been an error. Just as a little example to begin with. Okay, and I'm going to spell that right. And run. Okay, so this time it says there's been an error. It will continue executing my code, so it means if I've got some sort of a fatal exception in my code or a problem in my code, the code isn't going to stop. And it's going to print out nicely on the screen there's been an error. And in fact, if I wanted to explain what the error was to the user, I could say, I could put a colon after that. And remember the variable that we've defined as the exception, we can then use that. Let's shrink that down a bit. I can then print out immediately after this. I can say plus e dot toString. So it will give a. I don't even need to say toString. It will automatically call the toString method, but I'm gonna say I'm gonna specify it. So e dot toString, and that will give me what the error was. So here we go, and this time it says there has been an error, and then it tells me what the error is. Okay, and what line it's on. Now, as well as a try and a catch, if I want to, I can add a block called finally. Now, finally means this doesn't receive any parameters. Finally means that no matter what happens, this will occur. So I'm going to say finally. Right. I'm going to say finally. This is the end of the program. Thanks. So now, whether there has been an error or not, this will print out. If there's been an error, it will print there's been an error and it'll tell me what it is. If there hasn't been an error, and then it'll print out end of the program. If there hasn't been an error, it won't print this, but it still will print out this is the end of the program. I'll explain why this might be useful in a second. I'm going to run that just to prove it. There you go. This is the end of the program, thanks. Now, typical situations when you might want to do this. Imagine if you're trying to open a file to read something in, and you're not sure whether the file actually exists. You would put the code here to check whether to try and open the file. You would put the code here to say, oops, I'm sorry, the file doesn't exist. And in here, you would put the code to close the file and release all the resources that you've used up trying to, the variables that you've made trying to open the file. So if the file does exist and it's able to read it in, then fine, it'll just jump straight to here and it'll close the file afterwards. If it gets halfway through reading the file and there's some sort of an error in it, like it's corrupted, then it'll jump to this exception and say, I'm sorry, there's been an error, and then it'll close the file as well. So either way, this will always happen. It's very, very handy, very handy in Java. It exists in other programming languages as well, but it's particularly useful in Java. It's typically used for accessing file systems, anywhere where you have to type, the user has to type in a calculation, so you're not sure whether they're going to type in a ridiculous calculation or not. If you're trying to translate or change a string into a number, because if you remember, I might still have this here, if you remember when we did an example of a GUI, let me see if I can just find it, a GUI, we did an average one, which inside the screen, just open that up, inside the screen it asked the user to type in a couple of numbers, and if those numbers were translatable, those strings were translatable into numbers, then it calculated the average, and if not, it printed there has been an error. So if I run that just to show you again, it's going to bring up a form, and I'm going to say first of all 3 and 4. The average is 3.5, but if I type something ridiculous in there, when it tries to translate that into a number, it's going to have an error. And notice that didn't print out a stack trace exception at the bottom of the screen. This handled the error correctly and brought up a little dialog box telling me there's been a problem, and OK. Now if you remember, the way we did that is inside our button text, and we had a try. And that try tried to enclose the code, which changed the string from that first field into a number, and the second one as well. And then we had a catch, and that catch, if there was an error, it brought up that dialog box that you saw on the screen. Okay, exactly the same thing. Jump back to Eclipse again. So just so you know, there are lots of different types of exceptions that can happen. But if you use the word exception with a capital E, that is the top exception class, the exception superclass, and it contains all others. All other exceptions inherit from exception, from that one class. So in other words, if you catch that, you catch any error which happens, or any exception which is catchable during the program. And in terms of the IB syllabus, that's all you need to know about. You don't need to know about other types of exception, just this one. And the only thing you need to be able to do according to the IB syllabus with an exception is print out what the error was. So as long as you know this, and you know this, and you know that you enclose this code in a try, and this inside a catch, and this is how you print it out, then that's what you need to know for your IB exam. Okay.